All right, so we are at a different location at a coffee shop, actually, up in Bothell, just north of Seattle. That's where we're doing the recording today. And I'm just testing out the sound as we wait for our guest. Don't know how to say her name. Hello.
Hi there.
How are you?
Oh, good. I hear you. Good.
Okay, great.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Yeah, so I was just thumbing through your book. So before I hit, well, it's recording. This part won't be on the show, but I'll edit this out. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm really happy to talk about anything you like. I was just reviewing the questions that you had. At some point, my favorite thing to talk about are the messages that I've been receiving or tapping into here lately. So
Okay.
I would love to share one or two of those because for me, they're full of the meat of what I want to share with people.
Okay.
So, but I'm happy to go through any of those questions or
those questions I usually just have those as like backup of like if I need to go to those, that's where I go, and that just gives you kind of like a taste of my questions. How long have you well, first, how would you like to be introduced?
So I've been a clinical counselor for 30 years, retreat facilitator. I'm moving into the area of spiritual life coaching. So that probably covers it pretty well.
And how do you say your name? I apologize for asking.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's Janine.
Janine. Okay.
Yeah.
Janine.
Yeah. And you go by Anna, right?
Correct. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I keep wanting to call you Annie.
Yeah. Sometimes, most of the time I'll get Anna. Some people will ask about the Anna. So before this was just all, I didn't hit pause before we hit recording, but before we actually dive into the conversation, I usually ask the guests if they're comfortable with just taking kind of like a podcast pause. That's what I've been calling it, with taking 3 breaths and just making sure that we are in our body and just tuned in before we start diving into the conversation. Are you willing to do that? Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
all about the breath.
Cool, great. Let's just both just take a breath in, being grateful for the day. Exhaling any expectations for the day. Taking another breath in, feeling it throughout our whole body. Exhaling any worry or doubt. Inhaling one more time. And exhaling and simply being. Awesome.
Yep.
I'm at a new location where I do my recording, so this is like my surroundings are all new to me, so I'm getting myself situated.
Yeah, I've been contemplating. I need to find a new surrounding. I was thinking about the fact that you're, very focused on strength training and working out, and I'm looking at my gym essentially. At some point, maybe I'll rearrange a little bit and make this a little more comfy over here.
Yeah. All right. Well, Janine, are you ready to get started?
Sure.
Awesome. We'll go in 3, 2, and here we go. Hey, strong ones, welcome to today's episode. Today we have a beautiful guest named Janine. She has been practicing counseling for the last 30 years, hosted many retreats, and now is moving into more of the spiritual life coaching. Janine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Can you just share first of just the difference between the counseling and the spiritual life coaching? How is that different from the counseling?
Ooh, wow, that's a very good question. um, well, clinical counseling really involves going into the kind of the unresolved trauma of the past, and there's not a whole lot of difference except for the nuance that when we're clinically counseling, we're kind of guided ethically not to necessarily inject our own spiritual beliefs into things. And I really have been leaning much more toward my own spiritual growth and development and getting some amazing awakening type experiences. And so that's leading me to want to move away from so much of the trauma focused angle of things to helping people to really embrace the divinity within themselves and really begin to live from a state of trusting in that. So in many ways, it's very, very similar, but from a clinical counseling standpoint, there's a lot. If I moving into the spiritual realm, for me, it feels like a lot more freedom to lead with the spiritual depth and the messages that I personally have been receiving over this past year.
Cool. So a question about the counseling aspect, because the listeners know I was in grad school for psychology 2 years ago and dropped out because of health issues I was going through, but also just the program just wasn't the right fit for me. My question with the counseling aspect, do you think we focus too much on trauma and it inhibits the actual healing process and prolongs the healing?
Well, that's been something I've been chewing on with, especially my spiritual development. I think you can linger there too long.
Right.
There's definitely value in being able to look for the root of what I call core messages that are driving our behavior patterns.
Right.
And taking the time that we need to bring the loving, compassionate voice of truth to that so that we can release it and rewrite it. So there's definitely value in that to me. But I think you can spend too much time there and just perpetuate more of the suffering than is necessary. And sometimes we get kind of addicted to that state of mind.
Yeah. I think that's what was hard for me, because I did a lot of personal work prior to the counseling, and then when I applied for the counseling program, and then part of the program was required counseling on top of that. And I just didn't feel like it was really helpful with all the stuff that I had already worked through. So that's where I thought, I was just like, no, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing with the strength training, because there's so much more. I think sometimes talking too much about something is not helpful. It's like, I go back and forth on it because it does needs to be said and spoken and get out of the physical body. But at the same time, I think we can create almost, here's a question. Do you think we can create almost a victimhood and woe is me with focusing too much on trauma and hurt?
We certainly can. However, I would say by and large, the counseling community is very aware of that.
Yes.
And the goal is to help people move out of that victim state of mind. However, even as counselors, we can fall into kind of that codependent angle where we take on too much pain we share that pain with the other person, and then we all end up spending a little too much time there. So, but I'm with you completely. I'm a big fan of exercise and working out, and I've dealt with my share of health issues as well. And I think there is so much to be gained. So often I just want to, teach a class, and, it could be yoga or working out, different varieties and forms of that, just to help people reclaim their power and their sense of strength. And oftentimes I'll refer people for yoga or self-defense classes.
How important is it to do this type of body work while going through and healing some of the traumatic past?
So when you refer to body work, you mean like physical fitness and exercise?
All the above.
Okay. I think it's an absolutely beautiful blend.
Right.
So from a therapeutic standpoint, we come with an awareness, at least my angle, is to come with an awareness that goes into experiencing what the body is feeling physically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at any given place within your body, your chest, your head, your, you know, anywhere, and explore the emotions that are resting there so that you can free those. So it all starts with being deeply in tune and learning how to tune into what's happening within the body. And then from that place of attunement, then you're in so much better of a place to be able to start releasing and moving into the fullness of who you are through physical exercise, you know, whether it's, you know, kickboxing, or I see that you do the kettlebell. I'm curious to know all the different things you can do, or yoga. So there, it's a beautiful blend because it's through the movement and the breath and the rhythm of the movement and even the music that we help to also shift everything that we're experiencing physically, you know. So if we're needing to shift negative thinking patterns, yeah, it all just breaks free when you move through movement and physical action.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I also find that when you are in that state of thriving physically, you know, when you're working out, when you're in it, or, you know, it could be a real vigorous workout, or it could be something fun like Zumba or dancing, it can bring you out of your mind, out of the head stuff that keeps you feeling really isolated and separate from your source. So to move into the exercise with it helps you to just free all the mind stuff, the head stuff, and the physical blocks that you experience, so you can move back into what for me is your more natural state, your natural state of grace and joy. And so, you know, you get to fall back into being a kid again and having fun and seeing how you can push yourself, or just, you know, being silly.
Yeah. I think there was at the very beginning when I launched this show, I think I did an episode on this. I'll have to go back and review, but I talked about the importance of having like a childlike spirit versus being childish, and how I think sometimes when we say that childlike spirit, sometimes people think of going back to that misbehaving like 2-year-old or the terrible twos or something like that, where we miss the essence or that innocence that children bring. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of how you bring out the innocence or that childlike spirit of that? I don't know what I'm trying to say, but okay, yeah.
Saying.
Okay.
to me, it's like moving back into your natural state. You know, that state where you are not encumbered by self-judgment, by the, you know, the self-doubt, by the inner critic, what I call all the ego mind messages, or the messages of the separated state, the messages that want us, you know, that keep us in this sense of separation from our source, from God, from others. So to move back into that childlike state is that place where you really just are able to free yourself from all of that stuff, and then can just be who you naturally would be without it all,
right?
Which is fun and silly and seizing life and living from your inner passion and your inner truth.
With that, what's the importance of having like physical habits, like, or not habits, physical activities? Like, I exercise so I can go and enjoy things in life, whatever that may be. What's the importance of having that versus just exercise along with that child?
That's a very big nuance there, because there are some people that exercise vigorously, but they're living still in that state of striving and feeling like they have to accomplish something and earn their worth through the accomplishments with the exercise. So that is not what I'm talking about, because that just breeds more inner angst and stress, and it's harder on your body. But when you're able to exercise from that place of, and like you were talking about with a routine, you know, daily nurturing yourself with the freedom of letting kind of the toxins go as you're exercising, letting the physical constrictions go, within your body of all the, the work stuff or the
Right.
striving. When you're in that place on a regular basis, then it's just self-love. It's just being loving and compassionate to yourself, to let yourself daily just enjoy that release and not worrying about what other people think, and just seeing, what your body can do without the head stuff.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
You.
That's why I asked that question, because like what motivates me to like stay, true to like some of the exercise routines that I have is the fact of like, I get to go do this and enjoy it, whether that's water skiing, surfing, rock climbing, whatever that is. And I think that's where I feel like, for me, where I find that childlike spirit, or when I see clients who are able to go through an exercise they never thought they would have the strength to do something like that. And that, like that excitement, like, bubbles through. And so that's why I asked that question, because I think it's really important to have that childlike spirit with training for like certain goals and everything, because then it amplifies whenever you accomplish whatever you're training for or having that certain goal.
Right. And do you also find you have more energy?
Yeah.
When you're not judging yourself, when you're not in that place of any expectations, but you're just really like enjoying the challenge of it, or just or being, connecting with nature, you feel energized because you're not encumbered by the headspace, the ego mind stuff.
Right.
Which ends up, restricting everything physically within your body.
Yeah. Going back to what you were talking about a little bit before with like the self-love, one of the questions I have with this concept, because when this became kind of like a hot topic, I was a little jaded at first, because I was like, what is self-love without the other person? Like we're a community species. We thrive off of community from each other, and having that network of support and love from other people as well. But how do you define self-love with the fact that we also need love from others and other people need love from us?
Kind of surprising, actually, if I use the word self-love, because I never use that word.
Oh, it's too funny.
So good you brought it up. For me, it's more about getting connected with that inner compassionate voice of love within you, and with our higher source. Whatever you want to name that, if it's God or Allah or spirit or your inner being, and it's about discovering your innate worth within that as part of like just that extension of divine love. And so from that place, when we know who we really are, and when we feel that inner connection to spirit, to the truth of where we're from and the divine that is within us, then we remove the blocks that keep us from feeling that shared love with each other. And we're more able to be open to experiencing and loving each other without judgment, without fear. We're more able to just be in that state of acceptance and embracing the other person.
Now, you sent me, was this a book that you wrote, kind of talking a little bit about all that stuff that you just shared?
Okay, so there's two books that are in the mix. There's a guided journal that I wrote many years ago. Okay. And I wrote that from the standpoint of really wanting to get myself and my loved ones and my clients out of the space of only journaling when you're feeling negative stuff. So I wanted to help all involved get our minds on things that really help us to align with our inner truth. So that guided journal, actually, I've taken it out of print. I've just got a few left that I'm using kind of as a bonus. If people are able to donate to my website, then I'm sending that book out.
Oh, nice.
But I worked in that for a good few years just to get my mind in the space that I wanted it to be in. Now, the book that I'm working on right now is called Your Indelible Worth.
Oh.
And that has come from really amazing past year that I've had. There were, shall I give you a little bit of the backstory so I can tell you about it?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So about 2 years ago, I was really getting tapped out and kind of burnt out from, I think, probably over empathizing with my client's grief and with the pain of all of that, and watching way too much news. And at some point I realized I was making myself physically sick. I was just really not in a good space from that standpoint. And I realized I was creating my own experience by what I was putting my mind on.
Mm.
So I committed to myself, and I've taught meditation for years, but I committed to a daily practice of meditation with a desire and an intention to acknowledge to God, to what I call lovingly love itself, to really hear what love itself wanted me to hear. Because I have had a sense, and I've had some pretty powerful kind of revelation experiences over my life, and I've had a sense that love itself has wanted to say more, and I just wasn't listening. So I sat to meditate for 30 minutes to sometimes upwards of an hour, just beginning on January 1st of last year. And I wish I had recorded like the dates of things. I wasn't thinking of that at the time, but I really I discovered very quickly kind of a floodgate of messages that came through to me. So, I would credit that to, I think I was just very, very open and willing, and a sentence would start to come to me, and I'd be suddenly realizing this was not me, at least not the conscious self I'm usually aware of.
Right.
It certainly wasn't my ego messages beginning to speak. And so I just kind of wait, and the first line seemed to just kind of keep repeating itself until I said, okay, maybe I should get a pen and paper and write this down. And as soon as I started to write, then it would just flow. And so I just get these messages that for me, there'd be times I'd just be crying through them, or other times I was ecstatic. Often as it began, it was usually addressing one of my own personal issues. I got to a place where I'm like, well, you're starting to help me work through all my stuff. What if I stop having issues? Are you going to stop talking? I was telling that to a friend. We both just kind of laughed about that. But I've gotten reassurance since. No, I'm always here, actually, always here for all of us. But most of us just really don't allow ourselves to take the time to be in that still, quiet place, to let go of all the ego messages so that we can start to hear that inner truth within us. So I had already been trying to form a book, but it wasn't quite coming, and I was working too hard at it, and I wasn't quite sure what the format should be. And then these messages started coming, and then I realized, oh, this is the book. So it's essentially kind of a blend between a devotional and maybe a workbook. It's kind of your own emotional journey to help you sit and daily do some meditation and get yourself in a space that you're really open to hear these messages from love itself, which are really quite deep and powerful, because they really are helping you to move through your own emotional blocks that keep you from living in that natural state of joy, your inner truth.
Right.
And so then there's some reflection that comes after that as well. And then I also have a blend of kind of some of the psychotherapy tools that have worked better as far as when I'm feeling heavy or stuck, or my mind's just got a hold of me and I can't get out of that rut. There's some tools in there to help you to push through or move through some of those emotional blocks and more fully absorb the truth of the messages within. So I called it Your Indelible Worth because that was the resounding message that was coming through, especially in the beginning. Like, it seemed like for a month it'd be like one topic would just get hammered into me and it was the stuff I needed to work on. And the first one was recognizing my worth, my true, innate, indelible, unchangeable worth, and that of all of us. And then there've been I've kind of been able to piece it together to about 12 different lessons that all the messages seem to group pretty well under. So,
Got
so
it.
there's a, yeah, so there's about a month for each of the lessons.
When you were writing your book, and you're getting those messages, or some people call them like spiritual downloads,
Yeah.
were you also doing a lot of body work at that same time? I know you were mentioning how much you're meditating and being still and everything like that. And I can relate. When I wrote my book, I was out in nature majority of the time. I took all my clients outside, and I just made sure I was in nature during that process of when I was writing. I wasn't inside. And so I think that can relate to how you were in that process of meditation, of just being open to those like downloads and messages. So yeah, any body work with that to help with those, or was it just the aspect of meditation? That's all you needed?
Well, you know what? I don't know if I know the answer to that, as far as if, what people need to be able to fully do that. However, I would say that I've spent, as a counselor for 30 years, and I'm also a student of A Course in Miracles, which is a spiritual self-study guide, which helps you to push through your own emotional stuff as well,
Right.
blocks. So I've used a lot of any tool that I've ever learned to help people push through their own emotional blocks that we first carry physically within ourselves. I've used on myself. Like I don't try anything to help someone else that I haven't first used to help me work through my own stuff. So I would have to say there's been a lot of, a blend of, it's interesting. You call body work like the physical exercise.
Yeah.
I call the body work the physical, the moving into the awareness of the body and shifting things through the body in that way that actually ends up being physical movement and releasing kinds of exercises.
Right.
It's kind of like maybe a spectrum, and then you get to the all out physical exercise.
No, that's good that you brought up the difference between the two. Because I think sometimes I jump the gun of just like body work is movement versus body work also is just the awareness of how your body's feeling within that sensation, or when you're writing, or like the tears that are coming.
Well, and there's also, I mean, just from the counseling standpoint, that body work does move into physical exercise to release as well.
Yeah.
And so to answer your question, so I've always done a blend of that, and I've always loved exercise. So I would probably, at any given day, I would have been doing some yoga or some type of physical exercise as well. And
Awesome.
I do quite a variety. So, but I don't get what you get as far as to be able to rock climb and surf. And
I don't do all
in Ohio, we're more limited, sadly.
I had another question. So you mentioned that like the how you're getting to that phase of burnout, which I think is really common, and it's a fine line, us who are in the service providing care aspect, and you're watching a lot of the news and how your body was reacting to some of this stuff. I want to dive in more on that, but my first question goes into what's the importance, or what's the balance of understanding what's going on in the world versus completely shutting that off and still being aware of what's going on globally, nationally, community, like just even in your neighborhood, versus just completely self-work, because we do have a role in some of these things, but what's the balance, or what is there a healthy balance to some of this stuff? Because I feel like there's negativity on a lot of spectrums on whatever aspect is going on in the world, or wherever you're getting your news source.
Right. So for me, I honestly did have to break my addiction to the news watching and to the kind of the suffering I was creating for myself. Right. I had to just stop altogether for a while.
Yeah.
Now, it's not to say that I don't think it's valuable to just pay attention and listen to what people are saying is happening, to stay in tune. But I do think that we have more power to affect a positive change in our world and in our communities when we're keeping ourselves in a place of love and connection, rather than regurgitating the suffering that's happening. or the
Right.
things that seem unfair or unjust.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is a fine balance, and I would have to weigh heavily on the 90% stay in that, get yourself in that place of connection and
Mm-hmm.
being connected to the love that you are,
Right.
so that you then have that to go out and to give and to expand, to help others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's definitely value in awareness, but there's a
Right.
real tipping point between awareness and joining in and regurgitating the suffering and thinking that we don't have a right then to feel joy or happiness
Mm-hmm.
because others are suffering.
Right.
And yet it's only from our place of our truth and our joy that I think that we have power to help alleviate suffering and to help bring other people up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you for that. Because I think even with just what's going on with the US, I find myself already like diving into trying to get as much information as I need to understand where do I stand on all of this? But it's just like you said, it's a very slippery slope to go down and just start accumulating and be that same voice of, I wouldn't say complaint, but of that worry.
Right. Yeah.
Versus,
go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, just like you said, I think when you are able to have that self-reflection and live from the place of joy and love, and fulfillment, that's where you're able to serve the world in a greater purpose versus joining that crowd of voice of that worry. Because then I think you are able to see it also from a clear mind from that perspective.
And something I've been learning even more so as well in receiving from these messages is that when we tune into the voice of love itself within ourselves, and when we learn to connect with that love that is greater than all of us, there is a power in that can shift things more than we can physically do by ourselves. So, from that collective consciousness of being focused in a place
right.
of love, there's more power to shift than there is in our small little independent selves thinking we're alone and have to do it all by ourselves. So.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that. Thank you. Any advice on burnout? Is it avoidable? How do you manage? Do people in our field need to take bigger breaks? What's your advice on burnout? Because there's been a couple of times in my career where I'm like, tap me out, take me out, coach, type of thing.
Right.
It's like, I need a break.
Yes.
And yeah, I would love to hear your advice on that.
So when I first started counseling, my first job right out of recovery from cancer myself.
Oh, wow.
I had cancer when I was in my 20s, just right out of college.
Uh-huh.
And as I was recovering, I was looking for one of my first jobs. And a hospice job is what seemed to be opened up and calling me. And I'm like, right. I don't want to do that. I want to focus on living. I don't want to focus on dying. But that was the turning point for me as far as beginning to understand just when you're connecting with people who are dying, you're starting to hear messages and hopeful things and stories about, this is not all there is. And so for me, that was kind of a turning point in realizing I've always had a strong faith, but seeing very clearly that there is something more. To all of this, and it's doesn't just stop here.
Right.
But with my hospice work, that was where I learned that to take on another person's grief is not saving them from their own grief.
Right. Yeah.
You're just kind of falling in the well yourself.
Right.
So that was one of the early lessons I learned, was to give myself permission to not have to go there in the midst of that deep grief. Now, given that I used that and knew that for so long, I still ended up getting getting burnout.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, really valuable that we learn to be even more loving and more compassionate with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I don't think most of us in the helping professionals give ourselves permission to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like more permission to set stronger boundaries, to say I can only see, you know, this many people, this is my limit.
Mm-hmm.
And to really take the time every day to make sure, you know, you have your own quiet meditation time, you have your own exercise time, you have your own time to go do something fun.
Mm-hmm.
Probably maybe 15 years ago, I committed to not seeing any clients before 10 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
because that morning time became my quiet time,
Right.
my time to meditate and time to
Mm-hmm.
connect. And I had to really breathe through a lot of anxiety about that because there were so many other things I should have been doing in my head.
Right. Yeah.
But that became, you know, a good part of my
Mm-hmm.
own practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that and exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all in the helping professionals err on the side of giving more than is probably healthy for us.
Right. Yeah. A couple questions with what you just shared. What's the difference of taking someone's grief on versus holding space for the grief? And how do you approach it, and any advice on that?
Well, I think for me, when I can stay grounded in the presence of love itself within me,
Mm-hmm.
then I can surrender the outcome and I let go of the need to think I have to come up with a solution or fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can stay more in a space of just extending love and kind of wrapping the space in love and just joining that person where they're at without having to take it on myself from the standpoint that I should be able to fix this or make it go away or but it's very tricky because there's always going to be some grief that gets tapped in you at certain points. You know, it might pull up, you know, just your own, it could be you just grieving for the circumstance, or it could be it brings up your own feeling memories of a loss or and at that point it might just be more so that we have to give ourselves permission to say, okay, I need a day off. I need some time for myself to process this and to let nature have its way with me, or you know, just to heal, just to take care of myself for a while, because we're human. and it's probably not realistic to expect that we're always going to be able to do that.
Right. Yeah. You keep mentioning these messages, which I'm kind of referring to, like the spiritual downloads. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you started hearing these, what they are, and how are you using them, or how are you interpreting them?
So I find this ironic, actually, because these messages, I realize now, are messages we all need to hear, and messages it addresses all our own stuff, right? The irony is, sometimes I laugh because this clearly can't be me, because I'm not doing very well following these messages. So I feel like I'm just like a case in point. Let me be an example for you of someone who's trying to, you know, absorb these messages and live them.
Right.
And it's one thing to hear them, and I can be in a wonderful state of peace and bliss and feeling completely connected to love itself, feeling that oneness, and, you know, not attached to my sense of, you know, my own identity, who I am as a mother or a counselor, that sort of thing. But it could be, you know, just several hours later, my head stuff just takes me away again, and I get caught back in it. So these messages have really been just like love itself, helping me get out of my own way and teaching me about really the power of that divine connection with love itself. The guided journal that I told you about earlier follows in many ways, you know, the concepts of the law of attraction. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but you know, what we put into our minds, we create. We are the creators of our life experience. and these messages are just they're like the depth and the meat behind how this all works.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what it really takes to trust, and how you really practice trust,
Mm-hmm.
and what really comes from when you trust, from when you
Mm-hmm.
really align with that divine that is within you, and
Mm-hmm.
trust in that, how then you join in the co-creative power of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
How things do, how what you put your mind on really does come back to you, because you've been in that place of connection,
Mm-hmm.
and in your natural state, free of all the voices of the ego mind, of that state of separation.
Yeah. Are you saying this is almost like your gut instinct, or something completely different?
I can't call this my gut instinct.
Okay.
This for me feels like I've just tapped into the divine within.
Uh-huh.
And I think that is within all of us.
Right.
Absolutely. It's absolutely within all of us. But I just really committed to letting myself receive it. And I think there's a certain degree, which I'm realizing here recently, I had to acknowledge a certain degree of letting myself acknowledge that I'm worthy to receive it. Because I think so often, the other irony is that there's been a year of these messages, and I've had a year of going in and out of my own denial. Like, this can't be real. I must be making this up, And I think that's what we're all experiencing in life, is we're living in kind of a state of denial, as far as there is a higher source that is there for us, and it's who we are. We are part of it.
Right.
And yet we're all in this state of denial, like, that can't be real. I really should be more miserable. I'm really destined to a life of struggling. When here's this higher power within all of us that's available and easily accessible, if we allow ourselves to do the work of noting, am I listening to the voice of doubt in that separated state, or am I listening for the voice of love itself? So for me, it's also been, just the irony of, how can I be listening to these messages that are so profound and so powerful, and I'll have different confirmations when I start to doubt. Yeah, this is real. This really isn't, just your subconscious speaking exactly.
Yeah.
But then even I can, go the next day and end up doubting again, and end up in, kind of denial. This can't be real, and struggling back again with my own, head stuff.
Yeah.
Worry about things. So.
With all of this, because there's been times in my life where this is a very simple example. It's a couple years ago, but I was in line for Starbucks, and I was feeling super guilty for, like, I can't afford coffee right now. I shouldn't be, paying $3 for a cup of coffee. I should be at home making my own cup of coffee. Just like that mind game that you play sometimes. But I had this feeling of just like, don't worry, I got you covered.
Yes.
And the person in front of me paid for my coffee. And it was one of those moments where I was just like, okay, like, he has me, he sees me, he hears me. Even like when I don't believe, or like have that doubt or second guessing. Is that what you're referring to with some of these?
Yes.
Yeah.
Love itself is always there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of some of the profound messages that I've heard repeatedly, like, I need to get it. I'm always here. I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
It's not about you having to find me. It's about you letting go enough so that you can hear me. So,
letting go, I think we don't talk about letting go enough. Because there's been times, even just recently, where for me, it's more of that personal relationship with God. And my conversations with him have been lately of like, God, I miss you when I used to water ski. God, I miss you when I could feel your presence, when I was training at this certain gym. Like, and it's one of those things of like, I'm here right now. Why don't you embrace me right now? Like,
yes, you hear that.
Yeah. And so it's hard, because I think this is what can be challenging for people, is when God, or when you've had big moments, or really felt that connection. It's hard to let go of that feeling of the past to embrace that connection now, because it could be even stronger. And that could be what's maybe intimidating, or what's holding people back. Do you agree?
Like you have a new expectation every time.
Oh,
Like you
I
think
guess it's not necessarily expectation. It's this was so sweet at this moment. How could something be so much better than this? And how to let go of like those sweet moments, but still be grateful for those, but to allow more of those type of moments.
Well, and I wonder if it's about letting go of those moments, or about, for me, it's about savoring those moments and going, oh, that was so wonderful when I heard you then. I'm looking forward to what, to being in that space and hearing what else you have for me.
Yeah. Interesting.
I guess that's my angle, because
right.
When I savor those spaces, it reminds me that love itself, that God is there, and it's not going anywhere either. So I'm going to hear it again. Yeah. But I've had other times, I remember I was in the midst of a divorce, and I was very miserable, and I'd gone on a big long walk, and I sat under a tree, and I still remember it was right in front of my house, and I was just crying and just letting down, and just breathing and just kind of sitting with my grief. And I heard that kind of voice just like you heard, and the voice was, remember who you are. Remember who you are. Remember who you are. So often for me, sometimes it comes in threes. But I kind of it was really powerful, and I've not forgotten it. But I notice when I think about just the denial or the rejection of that, that I didn't let myself fully grasp the magnitude of that moment. I just kind of tucked it away, and in a way just kind of disregarded it a little bit. And I think love itself is speaking to us, and we hear it, but then we think, that can't be, or maybe I made that up, or and we kind of don't always let ourselves embrace the magnitude that the love itself is really, really, really right here all the time.
Right. Yeah. So fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing yours.
Oh yeah, of course.
Validating, and it's fun to hear other people tell me, yes, I've had these moments too.
Yeah. You mentioned the Course in Miracles. Can you just explain what that is? I've dabbled in it a little bit, and then if you're willing, because I'm curious, just if you have any religious backgrounds, because I'm always fascinated with how people come across the Course in Miracles and what their background is moving into it.
I grew up in a non-denominational church in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
A really large one. I still love it. It's called First Community Church. And something that was really powerful to me that I noticed about the church when I was growing up was that we had youth ministers from different denominations. So,
interesting.
As one maybe moved on, then we ended up with one from a different denomination. So they're very much affiliated with the United Church of Christ, but I know we had one Baptist minister, and I'm pretty sure we had some from some other denominations. I was kind of young, so I probably wasn't paying much attention. It's a very, very open and affirming and open-minded community. So that was pretty powerful for me. When I moved to this small town here in Ohio, just north of Columbus, I've experienced a whole kind of different culture of religion for me, and so I'm learning that not everyone has gotten the experience of a loving, unconditionally loving, accepting God in their lives, and so that's a little bit of the background there. Now, one of my sisters had given me the Course in Miracles. She'd just given me the book. I think maybe she'd already worked through it, and I'm pretty sure maybe she just wasn't reading it at the time. But I had it for about 10 years before I started reading it. And I think it was kind of one of those God moments that I discovered it and started in it. Because the first time I picked it up, I was like, oh, this is just too much.
It's a lot.
If you looked at it, it's hard. You
Yeah.
have to let yourself be in an open state of just absorbing it. And so when I started reading it, I just read maybe like a page at a time. Now there's a combination. There's a textbook, and then there's a workbook that goes with it. And there's also a manual for teachers with it. So I'd read maybe a page of the text, or if it was really pulling me in, I'd keep going and read a few more. And I remember frequently just saying, God, help me get this. Just help me get this. And it did. It really opened up for me, and it really spoke to me. And then I do like one of the pages in the workbook every day, which is, it's just all invaluable. I can't. It walked with me through all of the hard times. You know, from that point on. And it really is, in many ways, the messages are, well, the concept is just similar to the messages I'm getting now. We think that we're separate from our source, and so we create this, the kind of our own suffering by being in the state of judgment or feeling like we're guilty of something, or and what we don't realize is that we're already safe and healed and whole, and more than enough, just the way we are. But it's really a process of helping you just to let go of those messages of the ego mind, or the state of separation that keep you thinking you're alone in a scary world, and that you're a victim to this world.
Yeah. How does that compare to the biblical text?
For me, beautifully. Actually, one of my undergraduate degrees was in religion.
Oh, okay.
So for me, it illuminates the biblical text. It's kind of, it feels like Jesus is speaking in through the course and is saying, let me help you get this, because I don't think you quite got it right.
I see.
In the biblical text. So it really just illuminates it. And I've been thinking here more recently, especially since I've been getting these messages myself, that I really want to go back through the New Testament and read again what is said, what Jesus was quoted as saying there.
Right.
Again, just to, now that I'm getting it so much more than I ever did before. So for me, it's a perfect blend. It just explains it all.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Awesome. We're about running close to our time frame. Is there anything else you would like to share with the listeners?
Would you care if I'd read one of these messages?
Oh, please do.
Yeah, okay. So this is one that I received just this last week, and I think this is meant for all of us.
Okay.
Let there be no more apologies for the grandeur that is you. May you never again second guess the truth that is you, your divinity in union with me. May you know whose you are and make no excuses for our divine connection, for it is your natural state with me. May you surrender suffering and fear and choose again the truth of our union, and therefore the peace and joy that is your inheritance. For you are only love, and in the union, the merging of our one love, is all freedom and all power in co-creation. For nothing but love is real. Stand firm in your knowing. Breathe in only love, for that is what you are in union with me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you asked. Well, Janine, it was a pleasure having you on the show. I'm so glad we were able to connect. This has been a joy listening to you and knowing your story and understanding how we can be open to this power that's beyond our comprehension, and understanding that it has us, being that we're held in it.
We're all okay.
Yes.
All okay. Yes.
So thank you so much for sharing that. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the show, welcome. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it out to your family and friends. And then for the show to continue to grow and reach other people who need to hear this message, give it the 5 stars and leave a comment below. Other than that, I'll be peacing out. Oh, you have one other thing?
Can I mention one other thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you so much, Anna. Just doing what you're doing. What a gift you are.
Oh, thank you.
And if people would like to read more about my story or about the book that's coming out, my website is JanineMiller-DeLany.com. Should I spell that?
No, well, I'll have it in the show notes for everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll
Wonderful.
be down in the show notes. Yes.
And there's a free meditation at the end. And if you're interested in the free sample chapter of the book, if you mention Anna's podcast, and I'll go ahead and send that to you as well.
Beautiful. Awesome. All right. Well, strong ones, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a blessed day. We are peacing out.
Peace out.